Okay, so it looks like we're only three. So welcome everybody to this October 25th Core Modules Developers Meeting. In the agenda for today and the announcements, there's a new release of the feedback module that was released, so go ahead and give it a try. It fixes an issue. I think Google changed to require TLS 1.2 for reCAPTCHA. So if you have other stuff that uses that, you might want to give it a check. On some environments, it defaults to that, and on some environments, it's going to negotiate for a lower one. So it was like an intermittent issue. Just on some sites, I had that issue, but this forces TLS 1.2 for reCAPTCHA. I need to do the same check in the same environments for form and list, which also uses reCAPTCHA. So there's probably going to be a new release of that very soon too. We've made it the NN Community Jekyll theme in order to be able to use that as a kind of skin, a kind of template for, yeah, it's more than a skin, it's a template because it uses data, metadata from the actual repository where you put the documentation. And we have made a sample of this in the fact module. So basically, the theme is this repository.
Your screen is not showing, by the way.
That would be a good idea to share the screen. Are you seeing the correct one here?
In GitHub.
The Jekyll theme? Okay, cool. So yeah, so this repository contains the actual theme. The theme preview and the theme documentation is actually in itself. So if we click this link, you can see the sample website and documentation on how to use the theme. And then if you follow that documentation, you can take a project repository, and with like 2 files or 3, you can have your documentation using that template. So there's a sample on the fact module. So basically, in order to have GitHub page, there's like 3 ways. Either you have your master branch, you have a docs folder in your master branch, and this will be the public visible site, or you can have the whole master branch be the public site, which we don't want, obviously, so, or disabled. So in our case, for our purposes, we don't really have a choice. It needs to be a docs folder on the master branch. It's good because if you have multiple, if you follow Git flow and you have multiple commits on development and you only merge on master when you release, then you release your new documentation together with all the new changes. It's cool for that. And the fact that you have your documentation in a folder instead of being a separate branch, then you can bundle code changes together with the documentation that relate to those code changes. What is more of a problem is when you're first writing the documentation and that you need to see the site to see if it works. So you need to commit to master in order to make that visible, unless you just see it locally. And there are some little glitches between what you see locally and how GitHub renders them. So you usually want to test them on GitHub to make sure. So I think we have no choice to commit to master when it's just documentation that we need to test, right?
Yeah, one of the things that I found, and you may have ran into this as well, Daniel, is that there is a way to do an empty commit
Yeah.
to GitHub. And I think that is quite useful in this case where you can do an empty commit and it forces a rebuild of the docs folder.
Yeah.
So that's a nice way to handle that. Of course, it still shows up as a commit, but doesn't have any impact on the rest of the code base.
Yeah. Now, in the very previous meeting, we discussed some people like to have master and development, and some people want to have that cleaner and have only master, and I've seen some projects which has no master, it has only development. So in those projects, if there's no maintainer, let's just change our mind and go back to master and development. If there's a maintainer, we would have to discuss with him if it's okay with him to switch that over, whoever writes the documentation on that. So that's about it for documentation. So it's very simple. If you put your docs folder, you need a config file with the actual line that you need is just this. This here is just for locally because it's not sitting on that repository. It points your local environment to that so you can have a better preview of how it's going to look when it's actually on that repository. It's like 2 lines of code. And if you want to have a structure for your pages, there is also in the data folder a navigation, which is very simple title URL. If you want to have sublinks, it allows 1 level of sublinks. So you just replace the URL by sublinks and then repeat the same process. And the rest is just either Markdown or HTML files, images, like pure images right there, so you don't have to think about another hosting for the images. So it's very straightforward, and it was very easy to move from the wiki to this. The number of adjustments were really minimal. It was easy to do. So what it renders is this. So basically that comes from the data file. This comes from the Markdown file specified in the data file. And you have your navigation here. The images comes from the images folder that is there. And everything under that is automatically pulled from that repository. So you get automatically a link to your downloads, to report an issue, all these things. There's also improve this page, which is kind of cool because it brings you exactly to the right file in edit mode. If you are if you are logged in on GitHub, you can directly edit this and make it a pull request. I can commit directly because I have write access, but someone else who has no write access would create right here a branch on his forked copy and can submit that as a pull request. So it's kind of cool. And it's going to look uniform. And you see that was one of the glitches. You see the images here. If you see that on GitHub, the images link work a bit different than if you see the same page on the actual generated site. So there's a few glitches, but overall it's very simple and useful.
I've got a question for you, Daniel, if it's okay to ask now. When it comes to organizing the Markdown files for those repos that have more complex documentation and they are utilizing the multiple levels, would it make sense, like for instance in the FAQ in here, to actually have a management folder and organize those Markdown files,
by folder?
Within folders, just to kind of clean up the root a bit, or just leave that up to the preference of whoever's doing it?
As for storage, you could totally do it. So then you just update the path.
Yeah, exactly. In the navigation YAML. Yeah.
In the navigation, I've thought a little bit about this. I wanted to do something that everything would be on the root and it would just pull all the files automatically, which is possible, but then you have no hierarchy at all. If we go with multi-level hierarchies, then I was thinking folders and then in those folders to put files, but then I thought it would overcomplicate for 90% of the projects. Very few have long documentation. So I don't know. I'm open to opinions, but I thought this was a good compromise between too simple and too complex. 2 levels.
Yeah. Yeah, with you. There's only a few of them that are big, and I think events is one of those that might run into that challenge.
Yeah. That being said, I think you can override parts. What I mean is that basically this thing, oops, this area here is one file. These buttons are one file. The contributors are one file. I think if you copy this part with the same folder name and same file name into the local documentation, it's going to override the one on the team. I'm not 100% sure, but I think that works. That would be something to try on a more complex repository.
Well, I was just thinking that the only thing we really change is the navigation
Yeah,
YAML. You wouldn't
yeah.
even
So
have to worry about
that's
that,
fine.
which feeds into that
No,
file that you're
no,
talking about there.
because that part uses the data file in order to generate this on two levels. So if you make something more complex, then you need to have recursion to come back over to repeat again for
Oh,
the
right.
third and
Yeah.
fourth and fifth levels.
Yeah, I was just saying for a two-level scenario, then you wouldn't need to do that, right?
Yeah, for two level,
Yeah.
no problem.
Yeah, just update the data
Yeah.
paths. Yeah,
So
this
that's
looks
kind
really
of
good.
cool. We have not something nice for documentation now. In other news, that's the one we're talking about. There's a new release of the events module by EPT, which solves multiple bugs. He's currently in vacation, won't be with us for 3 months, I think, vacations that they have. No, I'm just kidding. I think it's a month. Events. So I
I
know he
wonder if
fixed.
he is doing better with the time zone change.
Yeah. Mm. So I know he was discussing with someone, some issue was still occurring and there was some bugs still. It was not, he was tight on time and didn't finish to his liking. So he marked it as a pre-release, but it still fixes a lot of bugs of 7.0.2. So if people use that, please give it a try and report back in the issues what you can confirm, what's solved. He kind of got tight on time on this one, so just to be safe, he marked it as a pre-release. I've got a discussion with oh, I'm sorry, I don't have his name, Lee something, about the store module. He uses it in a couple sites, and Lee Hinman, I put it on the agenda. So that was on the DNN Open Friday that Mr. Anderson organizes, and he came up with a question to know if the store was still, the old core store module was still maintained or not. And that was being maintained by Gilles de Pigochet, not on the DNN community. There was some communications. We didn't get a clear reply if he was interested in bringing that back under the DNN community. And a few weeks later, he marked that it would no longer be maintained. So before that repository got closed or something and we lose everything, I brought it back. And after that, I saw the code was actually kind of clean. It's in C#. It was not using any deprecated APIs. There was some issues with the build process, so I fixed that. I ran a couple tests locally. Lee is not a programmer, but he helped me out with testing because he has running stores, and it looks like we now have a store working back again on DNN 9.2 and up.
That's that's really cool. Yeah,
Very nice.
I know Gilles,
Yeah,
and yeah, I was just thinking. I mean, it's a pity he left the community, and he's been very. All of a sudden, it all came back to life when something happened around the store module, and all of a sudden, that came through me. That no, he was still actively maintaining it, and oh, that's right. When the forum was yanked from the community site.
yeah,
So it's good to see that it now gets unblocked, so to speak, and it's moved back into DNN community. If he doesn't have the intention of maintaining it anymore. He's always maintained this module outside of the realm of the core community a bit, because it was a fork of like the original store module, if you could say that, in the early days of DNN, that was maintained purely by the French community. And so there was one of their raison d'etre, actually, this whole French community, that they had this store module that they were working on, and Gilles was the one who was actively leading that, and very much in the forefront and forging ahead. This was a time when the French community was extremely vibrant, so it was always a sore point when the rest of the world would ask them to kind of hand it over or bring it into the larger world community, because at that point Gilles would kind of I don't know, thumb his nose, so to speak, at the rest, going like, look, no, this is French made, it will stay in France. And I think if anyone could talk to him, it would be you, with your knowledge of French. So it's good to see that is now actually unlocked after, I don't know, like more than a decade, so to speak.
Yeah. So it's not an extraordinary e-commerce module, but there's people using it. When we did the stats about the module popularities, I would have thought that this one was the last one in the stats, because e-commerce, there's so much other modules available that are way more full featured than this, and I was surprised how high it was in the popularity. So I don't personally use it, but I wanted to at least make it work with 9.2. And if we have a couple people that can test and report issues, well, I'm happy to help. And I can't say it has been badly maintained. The code was nice. It was not using any deprecated APIs.
No, I don't doubt that, because he has been on top of it for years.
Yeah. The only issues I had to fix was some build issues, because I guess he was maintaining it on himself. There was some files missing in the repository, which were very old SQL files. So I don't think nobody installed this from scratch.
Right.
So it didn't affect the install. And there was some SQL that is not compatible with the new SQL versions. So I had to rewrite a couple things. But again, it was only on the old SQL files. So probably on upgrades, it would not affected that.
No.
So that's it. We have a working store module.
Cool.
And Lee has edited the documentation. It was Word documents. I opened an issue to put this into GitHub documentation, but we have the files with the updated documentation from all those years. So to bring it on par to what the module works now, and he's working on taking new screenshots, so it looks like it's on the NM9 that this was written on. So even though he's not a programmer, it's still a lot of help. And when we get the documentation started, he might go in and help us out writing the documentation. Cool. On the unfinished business automated builds, that was Andrew Huffling taking care of that. You guys have anything to comment on this, or gonna go meeting easier?
Well, I mean, there was some conversation with Oliver, about some of this as well, and potentially going different route with these.
Okay.
Yeah. So
maybe you can clue me in, because I didn't follow the discussion, but I am very interested in this subject, because if as soon as I get the time, I want to switch to Cake as well. And I've been playing around with it in another module, but haven't had the time to finish that yet. Certainly there are a number of modules, and one of them is actually the blog module, which is a core module, that are still custom built, like with my own tweaked build process that will only work probably on my development machine. So I want to look at moving that forward as well. And rather than first go to Gulp or some other tool and then go to Cake, I'd like to make that jump immediately to Cake. So I was wondering what the ambition level was with this build tool, because I'm a bit, I can be a bit particular about the build process that I use. I want, for instance, to I will always tweak the version numbers in my assembly info file, along with, of course, what goes out into the manifest as a version number and on the zip file as a version number, so that whenever you're doing forensics on the site, you can check the bin folder and check what DLL is there. Yep. You keep all those things in sync. That's just one of those things that is commonly, in my opinion, overlooked with building modules. Another thing is, in my opinion, that the manifest should be built by the build process. It should not be it shouldn't be up to the developer, for instance, to name every single SQL file that you've got, right? You've got a directory with SQL files. The manifest should be built from those SQL files, basically, that are there. It's not very hard to do this kind of stuff, but when it's done right, it makes your releases so much more waterproof, right? You know that you press the button, that your manifest is going to be valid, that your version numbers are going to be valid, and all inherent in the process. So
maybe there's something we could revamp when EPT is back. He worked on DNN. I don't remember the name, but it's basically you can decorate your methods, your controllers and stuff, and the build process takes that and generates the manifest for you. I ran into a problem with that with how they changed the method for search indexing. So that build process was not updated for that, so I had to manually tweak it to fake the old interface in order for the manifest to be written the correct way. So I just added the old interface as a comment and it worked. But maybe it would be a good idea to take that, which I think was nice, and
that's an interesting approach, and I'll definitely want to have a look at that. One other approach I've used recently is because we're now all using JavaScript or Node.js tools for the client side, is actually to leverage the package.json file and have the version number in there. That's my central point now for the version number. And also to create just a new blurb of JSON that corresponds to the bits and pieces that can't be auto-generated, like the module definition, for instance, right? Where you want to say, okay, well, I'm going to create one extra module control. And then all I need to do is just fill that into the package.json file, and that's it. Then I know my manifest is going to be good, and it's going to be added to DNN.
What was good with the other tool is that for module controls, you didn't even have to do anything. It would go into the source files and find any method that inherits from module base. And it knows, oh, there's a view here. But that was in
that's MVC
Forms world.
Right. That's yeah. Because there's some subtle differences there.
Yeah. So that was in a web forms world, but it would actually go into the source files and find out.
Ernst Peter was doing that. What was Andrew looking at with regard to Cake?
Andrew was preparing so that we have Cake and VSTS, which was renamed to something,
Azure
uh,
DevOps.
DevOps.
Why would I want Azure DevOps?
Well, because it's free now. So
No, but
Yeah.
wait. Why
no,
would I
sorry.
want
I mean,
it?
that was just my quick. Sorry,
Yeah, yeah.
I've got 500 things going on here at one time.
No, I
Yeah,
understand, but
it's
wait.
a moving target, but the discussion was between VSTS and I'm not the
We were
expert
talking about AppVeyor at the time, I
at
believe,
Bayer.
and he would lean way more towards VSTS solutions just because it's so much more robust and more flexible to do
All right.
whatever you want to
Yeah.
do. I don't remember the specifics either, to be honest with you.
All right.
Yeah, so it's definitely something we have to discuss more. Me, I mean, I'm not an expert in the subject. What I think is important is either A, you can build locally without any special dependencies, so you can F5 and run, or B, if there's something to set up, it just needs to be properly documented.
Right.
I mean, all those tools are free. You just have to know that you need this, you need that. So
All right.
Node.js, we assume everybody uses it, but it's still not installed by default on Visual Studio free installation. You have to select this option. So
Yeah,
someone
but
who's
for many modules, you won't be able to actually tweak the code if you don't have Node.js installed.
for many, but not for all.
No,
So
no.
someone that comes from the web forms world and never touched front-end
Right.
intensive stuff might not even know what Node.js is.
Yeah,
So
yeah. But I don't think we should limit ourselves to 1995
no.
to
I
do our
totally
development
agree.
work.
It's just that we need just to explain. Okay, in order to build, you need to
Yeah.
install Node. You need a quick checklist. You know, you need this, and then you do that, and
Yeah.
just to know that
But
that exists.
But that being said, most of the community modules right now, especially core modules, are web forms based. So
Yeah,
Yeah,
they still are, but you want to give the freedom to the team to include, for instance, React
yeah,
or Angular
yeah,
components on the front end,
exactly.
yeah.
and
I
then
just finished a course with the React and Webpack. I'm gonna be
yeah,
more active a little bit on the persona bar space,
good.
but it's another moving target. I don't know if it's a good idea to make user controls with that, given that we can also use web components, we can also use something that's more framework agnostic. So it's still one of the
Yeah,
possible choices.
that's another discussion. But for um, like if you're building a module and you have any kind of UI that you want to do, um, I had this discussion a couple of days ago with Dave Lee from Open Store, and we ended up in this back and forth about me trying to convince him about the usefulness of using front-end frameworks, and it's a silly discussion because it's almost like political discussion, right? Because he hasn't used them yet, so he doesn't see the point. Because, well, jQuery and Ajax work fine,
Yeah.
and I'm trying to explain to him that in terms of as soon as your code gets more complex, then you're going to have issues, growing your code basically. And also he was running into issues where some JavaScript from other components started to interfere with his own stuff. And I'm like, yeah, that's one of the reasons you will want to use frameworks at some point.
Yeah.
Which one? That's all kind of on vogue, and today's framework is tomorrow's history, and that's a choice you make.
Yeah, what I find difficult is that learning React and Redux, which kind of work hand in hand, takes a lot of time. And someone who has familiar with Angular and comes to a module that is React intensive, I can't really help on this. I don't know how that works. And the opposite is also true. And there's so many frameworks.
Yeah, although at one point you start to, I've worked with Angular a bit and with React a lot. But I have to say, at some point, you're beginning to see like where they're all kind of going.
Yeah.
Which at the end of the day is having some kind of centralized store of your data and having some mechanisms that make sure that the UI that you're seeing in your browser is consistent with that data.
Mm.
Now, that is extremely hard to do from the server downstream if you don't want to go with bunches of screen refreshes. So, and if you want to do it by hand using Ajax and whatnot, you're responsible for doing all the keeping everything in sync. And obviously that's going to lead to errors. So that's why you use frameworks. Basically, I think, very generically, that's what you could say. That's where they sit. So, and I think the issue of web controls is not the same. Like you can imagine having web controls that are generic and that various modules use, but you could equally imagine that you use some kind of other technology to do that.
Yep. So, so yeah, that's definitely something that we're gonna have to keep in mind for the future generation of those modules. But like said, it's currently mostly web forms, so and it's not a quick change because it's really an architecture change. You have to rethink the whole module in order to change that. The only thing you keep is pretty much the data layer. So yeah, it's a long-term thing.
Do we, collectively agree we need to move the modules in that direction? Because that could give some people some guidance, as to like how to get involved.
Yeah, we'll have no choice at some point to move on from web forms unless there's extraordinary changes on the DNN direction. But if we're going .NET Core, unless web forms miraculously gets support in .NET Core, which I don't think is going to happen, but we're still waiting news, and it's still there's still evolution, but I would really doubt that. So
redacted NDA.
redacted, yeah, exactly. So we'll see where DNN goes, and we'll have to follow there because we kind of need that. So, but I think anything that's web service oriented, so that the server only pushes data and the UI is disconnected from that data in a way that doesn't depend on it, I think is a safe bet for the future. But going intensive on one specific technology might not be the right one, and we have to redo it. I don't know.
And that's the reason why a number of developers in the DNN zone have opted to stick to single page apps for their module development pattern, because that's the most loose from the pipeline.
Loosely coupled.
Loosely coupled. Thank you. Yeah.
You were searching for it, I could tell.
I like it was just
it's right there.
So repository module, I'm going to take this out from the agenda just because I haven't got a lot of requests for this. Sebastian kind of mentioned he was in contact with Steve Fabian, but that was like 3 or 4 meetings we're postponing this.
Yeah, at least.
So I'm just going to remove it. If it comes back, we'll bring this back on the agenda.
Yeah.
Just to clean up a bit. Extension catalog, anything new?
There's really nothing new. Really the same thing as what I said last month. I haven't invested the energy into incorporating this into the open content templates because I haven't heard good or bad whether or not this information is useful in that context, meaning the GitHub stats and all of that, within the context of the community extensions. Yeah, we're just talking about the thing that is on the DNN Connect site right now, Peter, the community extensions. So I've got, I guess the question, I've got the code from Timo and I had said that we were going to put it on a repo and in community. But I mean, do we really, should we do that at this point without any direction on whether or not we want to maintain it there? Or, I mean, because it really just kind of makes it a little bit more difficult potentially for Timo. If we do that, he seems open to it. But if we're not really going to do the GitHub integration, then what's the purpose of putting it there?
Right, exactly.
Really
but where do you want to host this?
Oh, it would still be hosted where it is.
Okay.
It's just that the templates being used for the open content would be, that code would be in a repo here where we could have people contribute to make it better. For instance, GitHub stats integration and that kind of thing. And then Timo would just consume that to deploy to the server with any changes.
Yeah.
But unless we're really going to, rally people around doing stuff, then I don't really see the point of putting it in a repo yet.
I guess it's up to you guys, or I don't know if you have it on one of your repos and people can still contribute to that.
Nope, I just have a local copy of his code. Okay. I mean, it's not hard for me to put it in there, but I didn't want to just put it out there just for the sake of putting it out there if we're really not going to do anything with it. I mean, I could certainly do stuff, but I just don't like doing stuff that's in the end not going to bring value to the broader community.
So is this something you think we should keep on the agenda because it's a work item to do, or should we take it out and we have something working and we consider that this is done for now?
Why don't we leave it on there one more time, and I'll tell you why. Because this evening we're doing a DNN hangout with Will Stroll, and one of the things we're going to have on there is the MV Quick Pulse, which is kind of where I learned the GitHub API stuff. And let's see if we get any feedback, from that, whether or not people think it's of value or not. And if they do, then to me, that's justification to work on this, because that was the whole game plan to start with.
It's a DNN hangout, right?
Yeah, capital H, but yeah. And cool. That's not a live event. It's going to be a recorded and playback type scenario for now.
Okay. So in the path of automatic releases and automatic generation of the manifest and all that, another subject that was there was automatic release notes. EPT was working on some tools that would pull details about the commits and stuff to automatically generate the release notes. He, being in vacation, we'll discuss this when he's back.
But I think
unless you have something.
I think he already posted a link to a few of those tools, if I am not incorrectly remembering. So we probably can. I think it's just a matter of, do we want to do anything with it? We just have to find them.
Yeah, it was like a list of 10 or 12 links, I think. So there was a lot of tools available to do that.
That would be really nice if we could figure out something that's feasible, because that would bring some consistency to the releases.
Yeah, I have. I don't know my opinion on this yet, because suppose you do a commit for a security issue, you want to avoid divulging the most as you can information about it. Being open source projects, it's always a problem to hide how some security issue was solved. I guess it just suggests you release notes and you can further edit them. And the other thing is, in my workflow, I always bundle my release notes together with the change that I'm committing. So I don't see a need for automating that, but if people want it, no problem. Yeah. But I personally don't see a need for the way I work usually. But yeah, it's tools that are available though. And I don't know if automating the release notes will prevent you from from doing it manually too, or if it's just
it won't.
Additional to that. So
yeah, I think you still have the ability to edit it. It just makes recommendations for you.
Okay. And we had also, I don't remember if it was on Open Friday or Facebook, Francisco Perez was asking if the vendors module would still work on the NN9. Honestly, I don't know. I haven't tried it. And that's one module I forgot to include in the list of core modules, but that was a core module. It was provided with DNN, and it was not part of the core. It was really a module that was removed. So,
Well, and one question I have on that is that was in the context of talking about the banner
Right.
module as well, because
yes,
this is, those two work hand in hand with each
yeah,
other to run the
they're on the
ads.
same repository. So it's
Oh, okay,
two
gotcha.
modules inside of the same product. So it's vendors and banners.
But
Um,
the table is no longer there in the core by default.
Really?
Well, I was
it,
wondering because that's like really ancient
yes,
default
Yeah,
technology in DNN, and I don't know if they
that's
ever removed
true.
it from the core.
actually, the tables and all that are part of the module. So
Okay, it's part of the module. Okay, so they
it's
moved that
disconnected
into
from the core. Yeah.
right. It's
So
disconnected.
the
Okay,
editor that was in the admin menu was the vendors module, and what you put on your skin or on your page was the banners module. So
right.
it
That's
was
right.
totally standalone, that module,
Okay,
which I had the same thought as you just said. That's why I did not include that as a core module. I thought was something of the framework, but no, it works totally by itself. So you basically set users that are vendors, and then you set the settings and the pricing and all that, and you set your banners. Now, that was in a world where responsiveness was not something needed. So it's all fixed sized banners, and it all uses tables to place them and stuff. So there's an update needed. That was the actual request, to remove tables and make that so it can be responsive.
Yeah.
Now, how do you make responsive, very tiny banners without losing font size on text that is on an image? I don't know.
Well, it
Uh,
kind of comes back to what's the theme using, what framework.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So my thought on this was to make it more templatable so people can decide
Well,
how they want to work.
that's one approach. Or
Um,
if we were so inclined, we could implement Daniel Etler's COI solution into the module so that the module prepares for either framework, that's in the
yeah.
skin, and it just detects what the skin is using. But that requires the skin to have the koi.json file in there.
Yeah, that's one thing. And
And I'm not sure if it's
to be
adopted yet, really.
honest, how I usually do responsiveness in modules is I use pure CSS. I try to not rely on any framework so that it could be placed anywhere. The downside of that is some frameworks are very nice, like Bootstrap and Font Awesome, and you can just put a class and you have a button and you have icons, and it's very nice and friendly to build advanced UIs. But for a module that only displays an image, I don't think a framework is needed when, you know, CSS, what's the name, Flexbox works on all green browsers. I think it would be very easy to make it responsive. My main concern was fixed banners that are like 143 pixels by, the standard banner sizes of advertising. Usually when people build them, they put the font, kind of small for some stuff. And if you're going to squeeze that, you're going to lose all the text. So
That's
I think
true.
it's good to leave it to the person who uses it to decide how he wants to display them. Um, on a case-by-case basis. So we could have a templating engine provide a default that would be responsive, but if you want another way, just override the template. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's actually a
yeah.
good point because there are standard sizes for advertising. So, yeah.
Yeah, and when you take 1,000 pixels and you squeeze them to 900, you're fine. But when you have 143, no matter what you squeeze, you're gonna mess up the image. So it's kind of a module that was really built for fixed sizes, even on the UI. when you upload your banners, there's a couple standards of sizes, skyscraper and banner and square, and they all have very, very specific sizes. So I'm gonna try to get in touch with Francisco to see if he has a test bed of a site that uses them and see how different solutions would apply and how it would look on those working with already having banners and stuff. So I'm gonna try to get in touch, but I just wanted to, for this meeting, to bring it back that it's one that I forgot to include, but it's now back into the repository, and that's something we would have to do. Anything else you guys want to discuss in this meeting?
No, you
The
had a
recorded
question.
portion?
Let me just check this. You had a question about helping out with the blog module, which
Yes.
I greatly appreciate. If you want to have some like background knowledge of how it all fits together, so to speak, the architectural overview, then don't hesitate to reach out to me so I can help you navigate the code a bit.
Yeah, what I would like is to try and merge the pull requests as a first step, everything
Right.
that makes sense and that can be merged.
Yeah.
And then this might close a couple issues.
Right.
And then I usually, I'm just telling you my workflow, but feel
Right.
free to, I usually create a milestone
Right.
with a dot release, and then I go through each of these after the existing pull requests are merged, and I
Right.
tag them. You know, it's a bug, it's an enhancement, cannot reproduce,
Perfect.
stuff like this, and I put it on that milestone, and I create a new release for bugs.
Okay. Okay. Good.
Now, the first step that I have some time to help you out. The first step would be merging these things, though. Do you have time to go over just reviewing these things?
I will need to, take a chunk of a day, because I first need to get back into it, so to speak, which is always the problem with all the projects. Is you can't just glance at it for a quarter of an hour and then decide on something.
Yeah.
You have to kind of get back into it and see what these things are trying to address. Of course, the overall architecture is still in my head, so I should be able to judge these fairly quickly. I'm going to see when I have some time for this.
Cool. No, there's no rush. It's just it's my next area of focus because I'd like to reduce the number of open issues.
And it's one of those modules that, in my opinion, is under publicized, because I don't really run with it everywhere and go like, oh, you should be using this. But I am surprised sometimes that people will, I don't know, say that, oh, there's no open source solution for this or that. And I'm like, you can do all of that with the blog module, because it's basically a publishing engine, which allows you to carefully manage how groups of people can collaboratively publish information in DNN. And it uses a fairly advanced templating engine based on token replace, which allows you to kind of make stuff really neat, nicely looking, let's say,
I use it on all my sites that need a blog. I use this one. I never had a need for something else, and this one works good.
Cool. All right, then. That's the only comment I had for the blog.
Cool. So that was the first step I'd like to go, and then I can spend some time on going and validating the issues, tagging them and stuff.
Good.
And
if you want to do like a docs kind of thing in this module as well, then feel free. And
Yeah, but that's stuff that I'd like to merge the existing stuff here because there's document updates and stuff. So I'd really want to start with the pull request. No rush though. Just let you know that it's my next area of focus to help out
okay.
on the next module. So anytime you want me to do something on this, I don't want to merge these ones without you taking a look at them first. So cool.
Sounds good.
So that's pretty much it for this week, I think. So thank you very much. I'm gonna stop the recording here.